I've built all my products, books, services, software from the ground up, reaching millions of users all through bootstrapping. Back when I started, bootstrapping was born out of necessity because funding wasn't as accessible. But today I believe bootstrapping is even more powerful and relevant than ever, even if you plan to raise funds later. In this video, I'll break down why bootstrapping should be every founder's starting point, the earliest and optimal times to seek funding, if at all, and some practical and actionable steps to launch your bootstrap journey. If you're serious about building a sustainable startup, let's dive in. Hi there, if you're new to this channel, my name is Ash Maurya. I'm an entrepreneur and author and the creator of the one-page business modeling tool, Lean Canvas. On this channel, I share systematic strategies and techniques for launching and growing a startup. So why is bootstrapping even more relevant than ever? Because the startup landscape has drastically changed over the years. Going back just a decade, starting up used to be quite expensive. You had to acquire software licenses or equipment to build a product, office space to meet with your team, and spend months building a product you hoped people would buy. But thanks to technologies today like the internet, cloud computing, and now AI, and methodologies like lean design thinking and continuous innovation, all these things are free or near free, and starting up is a lot easier than before, which has sparked a global entrepreneurial renaissance. You can now find startups in every corner of the world. Rough estimates peg the number of startups created per year at 100 million startups. That's 3 startups a second. But with more startups come more competition and more choices for investors. This is why investors, especially VCs, have moved further down the startup funnel, and they no longer fund product development or IP, but traction. Now, there are always exceptions, of course, but most founders today are expected to be able to build and launch at least an MVP and secure some initial paying customers in order to demonstrate early traction. But how do you find traction without first finding funding to build your product? This is where bootstrapping comes in and what I'm going to cover next. But first, let me dispel some common myths about bootstrapping. A lot of founders dismiss bootstrapping as an option because they think that bootstrapping is only for small ideas. Here's a list of the most valuable companies in the world, all recognizable names, and yes, they were all bootstrapped. Apple had the stereotypical 2 guys in a garage start. Jeff Bezos ran Amazon from the basement of his parents' house, and Meta or Facebook started in a dorm room at Harvard University. When I share this list with people, many are quick to point out that most of the companies here did go on to raise funding, which brings us to the second myth, that bootstrap startups never raise money. People love to pit bootstrapping versus venture capital, but the two are not mutually exclusive. All the companies on the list here started by bootstrapping their ideas, got to early traction, and then chose to raise external funding, not for survival, but to pursue growth. Let's take Apple as an example. Yes, Apple raised angel funding in April of 1977, but Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak bootstrapped Apple for 9 months prior to that by selling their Volkswagen bus and a scientific calculator. They used these funds to build their first Apple I computer by hand, which they demoed at a homebrew computer club 3 months later, which resulted in 200 units in sales. In today's dollars, that would be roughly $675,000, and note that this is not an insignificant amount of revenue. It was in the back of this success and a growing pipeline of more orders that they decided to pursue and raise additional funding to pursue growth. Like the bootstrapping versus VC debate, a lot of people simply boil down bootstrapping to self-funding versus external funding, but that only captures a sliver of what true bootstrapping is all about. Yes, bootstrappers self-fund their ideas to get started, but they prioritize switching to customer funding through sales over external funding to demonstrate early traction and gain leverage. Then they have a choice. Some bootstrappers choose to bootstrap all the way, while others pursue external funding for growth. This is largely dependent on the ambition and goals of the founders and the type of product that they are building. Some products like building computers are inherently capital intensive, and a company like Apple decided to raise external funding, but in that space, a different company, Dell, which was founded 8 years later, went a very different path. They bootstrapped all the way to an IPO. So while both companies bootstrapped at the start, got to a working business model, they chose different paths for growth from there. Even though this was a different time when startup capital wasn't as accessible as it is today, I still believe that bootstrapping to start is the predominant playbook and something I call boot starting. Every startup, I believe, should boot start for the reasons I shared earlier. There are a lot more startups today competing for the same finite number of customers, and investors today expect to see a product with traction. This brings us to the third myth around bootstrapping, that bootstrapping founders are cheap. Bootstrapping isn't about being cheap, but efficient with resources. Yes, because bootstrappers invest their own money, they need to be careful with how they spend their money, but there is another resource even more valuable than money, and that is time. A bootstrapper aims to minimize their switching time from being self-funded to customer-funded. If this requires spending more money in the short term to de-risk an idea and accelerate customer revenues, then that's money well spent. In other words, if the ROI is baked in, they go all in. So I've talked about why I believe every founder should bootstart their startup to first validate their business model before pursuing growth. What is that fork in the road where you make that decision? That's what I'm going to cover next. I'll share the earliest time, optimal time, and ideal time to raise funding. Let's start with the earliest time. During the early stages of a product, you need to focus on learning before growth, but investors only care about growth. Reconciling the two when the hockey stick is largely flat can be highly challenging and distracting. This is where there are better times than others to pursue fundraising. As investors value traction above everything else, unless you have a proven track record, it would be smarter to aim for early traction first through bootstrapping. Consider the following two scenarios as an angel investor. Which would you invest in? A startup that has launched its MVP 3 months ago with 3 paying customers and a handful more in the pipeline, or a startup with a growing waiting list of currently over 100 companies that have put down a deposit to get early access to their soon-to-be launched product in 2 months. The second is, of course, a more compelling traction story than the first and more indicative of problem-solution fit. Problem-solution fit is demonstrating repeatable demand for a product and what I consider to be the earliest time to consider any type of external funding. Contrary to popular belief, you don't need to first build a product and then attract customers to demonstrate early traction. It is possible to go from idea to paying customers in just 3 months across any type of product, whether it's hardware, software, or a service, when you follow a demo sell build approach. For more on how to do this, I've linked a video in case you're interested. The optimal time to raise your big round of funding is when you and your investors are aligned for growth. This is when you are hovering around product market fit, where the early stage fog of uncertainty lifts. At this point, you are better able to measure accurate unit economics, demonstrate profitability, and chart a believable 5-year growth forecast with a 10x story. Now, the ideal time to raise funding is probably never. If you can bootstrap all the way, you maintain full control of your company, but this, of course, has its set of trade-offs. As I've discussed already, some companies will require external capital to grow, but don't automatically assume that you will. Before rushing into the fundraising bandwagon like a lot of founders do, it's important to assess your underlying ambition and goals. Would you rather own 50% of a $10 million business or 5% of a $100 million business? While these are similar outcomes, the journeys are very different. There is no right or wrong path here, as we are all wired differently, but I recommend getting clear on the journey that you want to travel as early as possible. Be warned that this can be a deep why exercise, but one that can save you much heartache later. This is why I strongly advocate starting with a business model design before anything else. Now, there's a long list of happy bootstrap companies that never needed to raise funding because it didn't align with their goals. Jumping into the fundraising or accelerator bandwagon because everyone else is doing it is the absolute wrong reason. The good news is that starting a company is easier and cheaper than ever, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all. In the final section of this video, I'm going to share 7 practical tips for bootstarting your startup to early traction. I've bootstarted all my products, and here's how I did it. 1. Keep your day job. Many successful ideas start as side projects. The first stage, finding problem-solution fit, can be done part-time with very little burden. It typically has a lot of waiting time built in, like contacting customers, scheduling interviews, collecting metrics, and testing what works. Until you can find a problem worth solving, quitting your day job doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Number 2, build a minimum viable audience. while you're learning is the best time to also start building an audience around your problem domain. There are many ways to do this. You could start a newsletter, post on LinkedIn, comment on other people's posts, speak at events, and so on. The idea here is to test and spread your unique point of view. You will know quickly if it sticks or not. Number 3, sell before you build. Before delivering value to customers, your customers must want your product or MVP. The best way to do this isn't by building an MVP, but by testing the promise of your MVP using your unique value proposition through an offer. This is where demo, sell, build comes in. Start with the demo, not a working product. If you can't sell the demo, why build the product? Number 4, conserve your burn rate. The biggest burn rate at this stage is your time. You need to be ruthlessly efficient, rent, don't buy, don't scale till you have a scaling problem, don't hire until it hurts, and don't hesitate to spend money on the right things that accelerate the right kind of learning. Remember that time is more valuable than money, and don't trade short-term spending for long-term growth. Number 5, build a minimum viable runway. Pricing is one of the riskiest assumptions in your business model, and getting paid is the ultimate customer validation. So don't defer price testing to later, start charging from day one. This aligns nicely with bootstrapping too, where cash flow is king. I generally aim to hit 10K in monthly recurring revenue per founder as quickly as possible. That's when I'm no longer stressed about paying the bills and can start running much bolder experiments to grow my startup further. Number 6, only consider selling related stuff along the way. It is very tempting to take on unrelated consulting to survive, but it becomes difficult, if not outright impossible, to build a great product in parallel. Instead, look for other related stuff you can sell along the way, license out a piece of your technology, write a book around a problem domain, or give workshops and get paid to speak. Shortly after I started building my technology platform in my first company, another entrepreneur contacted me who essentially needed what I was building, but for a different use case. He ended up funding my platform's development in exchange for a right-to-use license. Not only was this related work, but it allowed me to validate my technology. My next company started as a series of blog posts, which I turned into a book and then workshops, and then that led to Lean Canvas and the Lean Stack platform. Each product that I built was a learning tool and also a product that I sold along the way and still do to this day. The Airbnb founders you may know sold branded cereals while testing their idea to both generate awareness and much needed cash while they were bootstrapping their company. Now, learning to make money is an essential entrepreneurial survival skill that they don't unfortunately teach at school, but it's something that is learnable. Number 7, hold yourself externally accountable. Getting hit by an idea is like falling in love. The first stage is what I often refer to as the honeymoon stage of an idea, when it seems like anything is possible. This is also the stage where we easily lose track of time and quickly days turn into weeks and months. This is why it's important to chart a roadmap and build an external accountability system with other stakeholders to hold yourself regularly accountable. Products are inherently risky, but prematurely going all in is even riskier. Instill a bootstrapping mindset to get you to the first significant milestone, problem-solution fit. This is when you go from hoping you'll create something people want to knowing that you will. Spend 3 months now to save yourself 3 years later. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I've got lots more videos like this one coming. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.